Hello, folks. Good to be with you once again. We are coming toward the end of our studies on IT strategy, management information systems, and the like. We're here on Unit 5 in our text, Chapter 17 through 21. And so we just want to, again, just like we've done in the past, just take a few moments, just perhaps a slide per chapter or thereabouts, just to review some key things. The authors do cover much more. You'll want to look at the PowerPoint slides from the authors, read the text, and so on, just to get a good understanding of all the details. But here, again, there are certain things that I think are very important to bring out and to help you with your studies, and hopefully help you as you go out into the business world as well. So looking at this issue of IT strategy, again, Unit 5, the issue of portfolios comes out. The idea of how do we deal with all that IT is required to do in an organization. And you've already seen a lot of the issues as you've done readings, looked at articles, and done cases, whatever it may have been in your class. All these are leading to you thinking, okay, there's lots going on in IT today, and they're expected to do a lot. And so how do we make that more viable? How do we make it so that it flows more smoothly and so on than it has in the past? Perhaps organizations in the past have gotten away with procedures that perhaps are not optimal. But today, that's very difficult to do. And so we want to look at these areas that are mentioned in this last unit. And so IT portfolios, the idea of managing or developing a portfolio, is the idea that we have certain things that IT is required to bring to the table, whether it's certain kinds of applications, services, hardware, whatever it might be, various technologies. Well, which ones should we do? And what determines that? Well, that was some of our cases, right? The whole issue is, what do we end up doing? How do we determine what we do versus what we have to put off because of cost or time or personnel or whatever it might be? And so it comes down, and I've sort of summarized it in these three key areas that really, this idea of a portfolio, this idea of making things as a whole for the business for IT, involve three things: governance, the portfolio itself, and performance. Very much like, and I think the authors bring this out as well, very much like you may have an investment portfolio for your IRA or perhaps your pension plan at work or whatever it might be. You have a portfolio itself, and then there's this governance of the portfolio. That is, you may be involved or you may have someone managing it for you, whatever it might be. And then, of course, in either case, you would then say, or in any of those cases, you would expect some kind of feedback as to, well, how is it going? How is my money doing, right? You at least you'd hope anyway, right? And so this is the same of an IT portfolio. That's the thinking of it all, and it does make some sense. And there have been some good outcomes as a result of organizations looking at this perspective. Now, some of those benefits obviously include how we approach the portfolio. And if the business owns the portfolio, that's a big benefit. Remember how in some of your own studies and cases and so on, often the issue is IT and business are not on the same page. Or business, it just sees IT as a cost center or support structure or something for us. And so we recognize then that there's this element of the business owning the portfolio. It's not IT that owns the portfolio, the business does. IT may help manage it, of course. It may report back on how it's doing on the portfolio, but you see the business owns it. See how that really works out well. And then, of course, there'll be the balancing of the portfolio. But see, that's not just IT saying do it this way or do it that way. IT can let you know what things are possible in the portfolio. But then the business, right, you, the person who owns the portfolio, must determine, well, how will we balance it? That is, are we going to have all maintenance activities, as we've seen in some cases, 80% or more, and that's true of many organizations still today, or will we say, we want to balance it better, and maintenance is only going to take up 40% of our portfolio, holding our own, as we might say, right? Keeping the funds and not losing too much, right, in risk, and that kind of thing in our portfolios. And then, of course, and so that balancing is very important as a portfolio. We don't get all in one area like we've seen in many cases. And then, of course, it's directed by the business. We've already mentioned that. Business is updated, and how the portfolio is doing is basically you get reports back. And so the business does too. So IT should be reporting back to the business. This is where we're at. This is how the portfolio is doing, and so on. And then finally, we have to see if we're going to add, let's say in your own portfolio, you might say, oh, I'd like to add Walmart stock or Apple stock or something like that. Well, the one in charge of the portfolio, the one who's helped maintain it, manage it in a sense, the governance of it, may have to tell you, well, this is what the impact will be on the portfolio if you do that, say. You may have too much Apple stock already, maybe, and now you're adding more, and that may, in a sense, put it out of kilter, right? The balance won't be good. That's important for someone to be doing, right? So new investments in the IT portfolio are judged based on the impact to the whole portfolio, and not just because so-and-so has said we should do it, right? Which we, of course, have seen many times in business. So number one of the 5 key areas brought out in the unit is the idea of IT portfolios or at least becoming much more popular today in business because there are a number of benefits as we see here. But secondly, it's a nice way of controlling IT demand. And so we have this whole issue come out in the second section of the unit, is how do we control all the things that people want from IT? If IT is just an open book, an open source where anything you want IT will give, well, you'll never have a lack of demand, right? You see that, of course, in our own economy and so on, right? When something is free, for instance, right? For instance, people said free healthcare, for instance, which is not really free, of course, but you see, the idea is if someone can get it free, or many can get it free, then what's going to happen? Well, people are going to try to get it free, aren't they? I mean, that's the reality. Demand will go way up for the resource when it doesn't cost anything. That's very important to see. So controlling IT demand means that we have to recognize the costs and so on. Well, how do we do that? Well, we can say to those who want IT services, well, it does cost something to do these things. It's not just free. It's not just a support service that you can get anytime you want. That there are trade-offs. And so you see, we can control IT demand by using a portfolio, right? Saying, well, sorry, that you'd like to do that, but that doesn't fit the portfolio strategy we have, right? Or that would put it too much too imbalanced, right? That would make our portfolio imbalanced. We really can't do that, say. But that all should be, of course, controlled by a governance structure of some kind. Other organizations have what they call a service catalog that basically they've already priced what things are for the various people who want them. So you want a new laptop? This is how much it's going to cost you. You want to make a help desk call? This is how much it costs your organization. You want to do something else? Have an application built for you or a phone app or something? This is how much it will cost. And so it's already been priced. And you have a little catalog or a little bulletin that shows, okay, this is what it will cost your department or whatever it is to get it done. You see this today in many ways in automobile repair, or perhaps plumbing or electricity. We've seen it a number of times now, where now people are doing, rather than negotiating price or whatever, they're saying, here's the price. You want a new capacitor in your furnace or whatever. Well, it's $150. Well, whatever it might be. So we, have this whole service approach. But then thirdly, there's the idea of charging back, so not just having a catalog where you can just pick and choose, but basically whenever you get service of any kind, whether it's a special request, like we're sort of talking about the service catalog, or whether it's something just normal service of providing your internet connection, for instance, to your department, right? So every department is charged back something each year for even the minimum kinds of support in the organization in the area of IT. These are some possibilities as far as controlling the demand, right? That becomes exceedingly important because when things are free, or at least perceived as free, then there's unlimited demand, right? And that's not so good. Now, there are some enablers of controlling demand, and the authors bring out some nice things here, and you can go look in more detail. But having an enterprise architecture, how do things look, what can be added to our architecture, and so on, help to control what is done. Controls the balance of the portfolio, we might say, and so on. Having good relationships, we've talked about this many times in our other studies, between business and IT. We already mentioned the portfolio, application portfolio management, APM. The governance structure of things, and how things are added to the portfolio and taken away from the portfolio, and so on. How is that done? There must be a governance process and structure in place. And then, of course, strategic management, which we've seen a number of times in our studies. The issue, it's not just IT doing what it wants to do, but what is the business strategy and managing that strategy. All these go together in the process of controlling IT demand and dealing with the portfolio. Now we come on to the third thing, which the authors mentioned is a technology roadmap. Now, this can be looked at in many ways. There may be many definitions, but basically, I've simply said it establishes the direction of the organization, establishes the direction from an IT perspective. And so we have, that is, sort of a knowledge of what it is that the portfolio can have, what it is that we can offer, how do we offer new things, and how they'll connect to the infrastructure and all this kind of thing. So all the details about what is allowed, basically, in reaching our destination. And so a roadmap helps us do that, right? So a roadmap says, well, you can go this way or that way. There are different possibilities. They'll get you to the same place. But you see, some are longer, some are shorter, some are more expensive, right? And there's different trade-offs, right? And that's true with a technology perspective as well. But there are benefits of having a roadmap and saying there are different options available. That way people can choose, right? Or the organization can choose. But the benefits, of course, are interoperability. That is, now, if we say, well, the roadmap says we can do it this way, this way, this way, or this way, but not that way because that's outside the purview of our infrastructure, well, now we already know that these things will work with our infrastructure, right? So there's interoperability. We won't have lots of things that won't fit our infrastructure. It deals with the issue of complexity, right? Things are very complex today. But you see, we can have reduced complexity if we have a roadmap, right? Because there's only so many ways to get to the destination. So not just any way we feel like doing, but certain ones we've found that we've tested and work, right? We've piloted them perhaps, whatever it might be. And through our innovative activities, as we've learned in the past, we see what works. There's flexibility, of course. It doesn't mean we only have one way of doing something, but there are multiple ways. But they're limited number of ways. And then we have speed, because you see, we can have different ways of doing it and choose. You know, one way may take a little bit longer, but there might be some benefits to us, right? There's more testing, perhaps, under that road, you taking that way to the destination. There's consistency, of course, because now we have only certain ways of things being done, certain methodologies in place for developing applications, whatever it might be. And there's consistency in our approach and also in our measuring. Remember the issue of the metrics at the end of it all. And then, of course, there's phases. We can phase things in. We can say, well, you know what, there are stops along the way, right? There's various hotels on our way. But if we go this way, we also have some parks and so on we stop at, whatever. You know, we have phases. We can say, okay, well, let's take this chunk, and we take a stop, and we can say, okay, let's rest a little bit and see, hey, where are things at, right? And then we go to the next stop, right, and so on till we hit our destination. And then, of course, there's cost. So there are cost benefits of having directions, having a structure in place. And this, again, all relates to the issue of the portfolio, because the infrastructure is also included as part of the balance of our portfolio, isn't it? It's not just left out as a separate thing, and all that maintenance, of course, takes up the whole budget, but it's part of the whole portfolio and seen an important part as well. So we have technology roadmap. Fourthly, then, we have system development. And here, the authors give quite a bit of detail, of course, but there are lots of challenges with system development because it does take time and money to make applications. And so there are trends, new approaches to things, to making development more cost effective. Because the reality is, if you do any reading on the subject, and perhaps you'll do some reading in articles and so on in industry, failure is quite high in bringing forth applications, systems to fruition. And so there are some trends. There's various approaches the authors touch on. You can do some additional study on these as well. But there are some approaches being taken to try to improve how quickly we can figure out when something's going wrong and so on. And so we'll see agile approach and other approaches that are mentioned in various places in industry. And so new trends include new approaches, many in the area of the agile approach, the idea of quick turnaround, piloting chunks and so on, piloting small pieces. That's important. But there's also improving the old methodology, realizing the waterfall approach, that is having a sequence of events, a project that basically one after the other pieces get done, and in order to get the later pieces, the earlier pieces have to be completed first. That's a waterfall approach, it's called. Well, that's still very good and still very helpful and very common still in organizations, but maybe incorporating some of the agile and maybe doing the cycle approach in smaller chunks, like an agile approach would do. That's now available. So the old methodologies are being used, but they're being modified. That's another way of looking at doing this. And then, of course, governance, right? The issue of keeping track of the process, project management, all that goes with it in relation to a project, and measuring, are we making the progress we expected to make? And then, do we have the outcomes from that portion that we've done that we expected to have, and so on. And then there's a realization, of course, not everything is done in-house anymore, that we can go outside. We've already looked at this issue in our studies. And so there are many ways of sourcing technology. But there are trade-offs, of course, as we've already discussed. And so keep this in mind. That's one of the trends, though, to recognize, deliverance of our applications and systems does not necessarily require us building it ourselves, as perhaps was quite common a number of years ago. But there are issues, of course, and the issues in relation to all this, and I've sort of summarized them in these three key things, is seeing the whole, right? That when we develop a system, we're not talking about just, give me something that works. But there's a lot of time and effort that goes into the actual software to process. That is, it's not just the coding. And, some people say, well, that's not much coding, get it done. What you see, but then there's the whole issue of the business involvement. Analyzing the whole thing, right? That can take up to 30 or 40% of your time sometimes, just analyzing the whole problem, say. And then testing can take quite a bit of time. In fact, if you take these three things, the business involvement, communications, analysis, testing, and so on, it may take up well over half or more of the whole project. And so now the coding is a small portion of the project, isn't it? So very important to see that. Number two, the one-size-fits-all mentality. That is, well, it worked this way last time for this project, but you know what? For this project, it may not work that way. You may have multiple approaches based on the type of project, who's involved, right? And that kind of thing. And then, of course, we've mentioned communication in general. We mentioned that first point as well in our business involvement. But communication becomes key, of course, as we've noted in many of our studies during the class. So again, system development is another key aspect of this section on portfolio management. And then we have information management finally. And here again, I've only just summarized briefly some of the key points, but information management is becoming huge today. We've noted big data previously and business analytics and so on, and this is brought up more in this section as well, business intelligence and so on. So the importance of new value, the idea of value being added now to the organization based on the production of information. Taking data elements and massaging them, cleaning them up and so on, and providing much more information to the business about our customers, for instance. So now people recognize there's new value being added by looking at information. But of course that requires new skills, doesn't it? People who can analyze these things. You have to create new roles. And so now you have business analysts, you have business analytics, you may have data analysts, and all these kind of new roles that are being, in fact, these are the fastest growing roles in some places, because now organizations realize how important the data they have is, and producing information that's usable to the organization. New insights, right? Because the issue of value comes out. But finally then, in all of this, there must be new practices to make that a reality. That is, how do we deal with our data? How do we massage it? How do we, and we've noted some of this already, how do we clean it up so that we have consistency in our data, so that we can actually merge data elements together and produce quality information and quality insights for our organization to use? That's much easier said than done. And so we see then there are all new practices related to information management. So the authors go into quite a bit of detail on this, and I think it's very, very important, but I've summarized it into these 4 key areas that are new, really, to many organizations. And some have not even really touched on it much, but many are starting to see the importance of doing so. So the authors in the issue of portfolio management, information management, system development, all these things go together in the area of IT portfolio management. How do we manage all these different things in IT to help our organization and the issue of demand and so on. How do we make it work? And so these things that we've covered will help, hopefully give you a little help in understanding how we might approach it and make it better for the organization ahead. So we leave these things with you, and feel free to study more on these more of the details, and feel free to touch base with any questions. And we look forward to our studies ahead. Have a blessed day.